The Trojan War. We've all heard of it, or at least the part with the horse. It's been referenced in countless media over the years, from movies to books, even children's television. But what really happened during the Trojan War?
Well, according to some, it may not have happened at all. But thanks to artifacts such as ancient Greek artwork and written accounts, the most famous being Homer's Iliad, we have a pretty good idea of what the ancient Greeks believe happened. And it all begins with Troy. No, not that Troy. This Troy. I said, this Troy. Who was in charge of graphics here?
You were.
Oh, right. 1 second. Okay, this Troy.
If we're going to understand what happened during the Trojan War, we must first examine the events that caused it to begin with. According to Greek myth, the Trojan War began when the Greek goddesses Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena were competing over who among them was the most beautiful. Whoever won would receive a golden apple.
Zeus decided that the decision should be up to the person deemed the most beautiful man, Paris, a Trojan. Paris chose Aphrodite, and in return, she promised him the most beautiful mortal woman in the land. Paris then abducted this woman, Helen, the wife of Menelaus and queen of Sparta, and took her back to Troy with him.
Agamemnon, Menelaus' brother, and king of Mycenae, convinced Menelaus to try and rescue Helen. So the two of them, along with Greek heroes Achilles and Odysseus, and a fleet of over 1,000 Greek warships, set off for Troy, resulting in war.
The war raged on for 10 years. Eventually, Agamemnon captured a priestess of Apollo, and as a result, a plague struck the Achaeans. Their health would only be restored after the priestess's return. Agamemnon agreed to return the priestess in return for Briseis, Achilles' concubine, as a war prize. Achilles himself refused to fight. Instead, his dear friend Patroclus offered to lead Achilles' troops into battle in his stead and donned his armor.
Patroclus was killed in battle by Hector, a Trojan hero, after being mistaken for Achilles due to his armor. Achilles, grieving Patroclus, reconciled with Agamemnon and got Briseis back. Finally, Achilles joined the battle.
Achilles killed Hector in single combat, and tied Hector's body to his chariot with Hector's own belt, a gift from Achaean hero Ajax in exchange for a sword, dragging him around the battlefield. Several days later, Priam, Hector's aged father and king of Troy, convinces Achilles to stop abusing the body and let them bury it. Achilles died soon after by being shot in the heel by an arrow, the one place legend tells us he was not immortal.
I suppose you could say that Achilles' heel was his Achilles' heel.
I suppose you could.
Armor of fallen soldiers was highly valued among Achaeans and Trojans, so Achilles' armor was given to the soldier that was considered to be next in stature to Achilles, Odysseus. Ajax thought the armor should have belonged to him and went mad with rage, killing fellow countrymen and eventually himself with the sword for which he had traded Hector his belt.
In the meantime, when he wasn't killing Achaeans, Paris spent most of his time with the beautiful Helen of Troy. He eventually fought Menelaus one-on-one, and when Menelaus had Paris by his helmet strap, the strap broke, and Paris was able to escape through the mist.
Calchas, a seer, gave a prophecy that the only way to win the war was with Hercules' bow and arrows. Philoctetes, another Greek hero who was wounded on the island of Lemnos, happened to be in possession of a bow and poisoned arrows, so he was brought to the battlefront. On the way, he was healed by a son of the medicine god Asclepius. Philoctetes fired an arrow at Paris and barely scratched him. Although it seemed ineffective at the time, the poisoned scratch ultimately led to Paris' death.
Now comes the part of the story we all know and love. With Paris now dead, Odysseus devised a plan to end the war once and for all. The Greeks built a large wooden horse, which was secretly a vessel containing Greek soldiers, and offered it to the Trojans as a peace offering. The Trojans let the horse into the city and began to drink and celebrate the end of a 10-year war.
That night, while the Trojans slept, the Greeks slipped out, torched Troy, killed the men, imprisoned the women, and took Helen back to be reunited with her husband. The Greek leaders took a torturous and deadly trip home, with many not surviving the journey. So is the tale of the Trojan War. While the aspects of Greek mythology may not have happened exactly the way the story says, Whether the events of the war itself are exaggerated for the sake of poetry or based on fact is up for debate.
Regardless of how much of the story you choose to believe, it is time to finally answer one of the biggest questions of all. T as in Troy? No, Gabriella. T as in the end.